The Battle of Salamis in 480 BC stands as one of the largest naval clashes in history. It was a battle of undeniable importance, far more so than Thermopylae. As such, it is well worth understanding for its strategic impact on the Greco Persian Wars and the broader trajectory of Western history. However, as historians get swept up in such macro-level discussions, they often leave behind the more intimate, human experiences of the moment. This is especially true when it comes to the hours and days which followed the official conclusion of the battle. From the harrowing tales of rescue and pursuit along the shores of Greece, to the unseen horrors which took place beneath its waves. So today, let us explore the aftermath of the Battle of Salamis. I love working on these documentaries, but the grind often makes it hard to strike a proper work-life balance. That often means finding ways to be more efficient, but I hate it when that comes at the cost of my wallet or my health. Today's sponsor, Factor, makes this easy by delivering nutritious, ready-to-eat meals which can be prepared in 2 minutes or less. They offer a wealth of options which can be tuned to specific meal preferences such as keto, vegetarian, calorie smart, and more, with over 27 options available each week, plus dozens of add-ons like smoothies, shakes, and desserts. Simply pick the one you want, receive your delivery box, check out the goods, and pop your selection in the microwave for a great, chef-quality dish that's ready in 2 minutes or less. Swap that over to a plate, and you won't even recognize the difference from your own home-cooked dishes. Plus, no cleanup. From personal experience living off takeout and grocery store pre-mades for the last few weeks, I can definitely recommend Factor as a more healthy, affordable, and time-saving alternative for a fast-paced schedule. So use my link or navigate to go.factor75.com and use the code POGINVICTAAPR50 for 50% off your first box. Once you click, my description will live update to count up the purchases. Each of these helps support the channel. Enjoy. Naturally, the most important factor which makes the aftermath of Salamis so different from most other battles is that it took place at sea. As such, the very environmental conditions which shape how one might think about combat are drastically different and, at least to my mind, far more fascinating. In most battles, we're used to there being some decisive moment in the action when the morale of one army breaks, leading to an infectious rout, followed by the panicked disintegration of the defeated army. At sea, however, things are very different. For starters, there is quite literally nowhere to run. But more important than that are the dynamics of going to war as a ship crew rather than as a unit of warriors. Most men are rowers, largely secluded in low obscurity below decks, with little awareness of their surroundings. Their only job is to row at the command of their officers. Blinded to the battlefield in this way, a ship's morale has more to do with the nerves of its captain when it comes to decision-making and cohesion of the crew in turning these instructions into actions. To do anything, they must act in unison, even in retreat. Adding further to the differences between land units and sea units is the idea that a warship can be disabled and effectively removed from the fight without taking a single casualty. Take all this together, and it becomes clear that the way in which the Battle of Salamis ended must have been a much more gradual and messy process than we might at first imagine, based on our understanding of land battles. To illustrate this point, let's now focus on what the defeat of a single ship might have looked like before expanding our focus to the entire fleet. In our example, we join a Persian warship in the second rank of the fighting line. For several hours, the crew has been backing water to maintain position as those ahead fight. Now, the captain appears to have spotted an opportunity to advance into a gap in the line and orders his men to row. As the crew moves forward, they now hear the din of battle more clearly above the sound of their own oars. It is a muffled orchestra of groaning ships and shouting men. Traditionally, a captain would prefer to maneuver, but the cramped battlefield offers little space, and so he instead resolves to once more back water and defend his small sector of the battlefield. So long as he presents his prow to the enemy, the strongest part of his ship, and his flanks are protected by allies who do likewise, they will remain relatively safe. Ahead, across a no-man's land of floating debris, the Greeks do the same. In such conditions, we might imagine that the Marines on either side will exchange missile fire. Perhaps at one point, the Greek ship opposite our vessel seems to have become stunned as arrow volleys suppress its deck crew and injure its command staff. The Trireme begins to drift to the side. The Persian captain now orders a charge across no man's land. His ship builds speed, easily turning aside the debris in the water. The captain is now lined up for a strike across the midsection of the enemy's trireme. Final, powerful strokes are given by the rowers before they withdraw their oars to avoid damage. The Persians now glide with deadly momentum towards the Greek ship, which has failed to do the same. Oars snap like twigs under the crushing mass of the wooden torpedo. Split seconds later, its ram makes contact, rupturing the enemy ship with a violent crash that causes unseen carnage to the crew below deck. The Persian Marines were well braced for the collision and quickly spring into action. With gangplanks, they cross over to the Greek ship to take out its remaining deck crew and take control of the vessel. The defenders fight on, but are quickly overwhelmed. Perhaps they might all be killed, but capture also appears to have been a plausible outcome. Herodotus, for instance, mentions how one Persian crew was so impressed by the virtue of a Greek marine named Pytheas that they brought the severely wounded man back onto their ship for the duration of the battle. As for the hundreds of rowers below deck, their fate is unclear. Given that they vastly outnumber the Marines, it is unlikely that they could have been easily killed or captured. On the one hand, the crew could theoretically try to swarm the enemy Marines to reclaim their ship, but on the other hand, doing so unarmed would incur many casualties. And so perhaps a sort of gentleman's agreement occurred in such cases where they might simply remain neutral at their posts, accepting that their ship was now officially defeated. With the Greek ship thus neutralized, the Persians return to their vessel and begin to row in reverse. They manage to dislodge themselves and are now crossing back through no man's land. However, they become stuck in debris. They lose momentum and are momentarily dead in the water. A vengeful Greek ship now takes the opportunity to launch its own attack. The incoming strike is seen by the Persians, who can do little else but brace for the impact. This helps mitigate the casualties as the Greek ram crashes into their ship. The Persian Marines make ready to defend the vessel from boarders. However, the enemy captain is satisfied with the damage caused and disengages immediately. As he pulls back, a gaping hole is revealed in the side of the impaled ship. Seawater quickly flows into the breach, flooding the insides. The sudden influx throws off the buoyancy of the trireme. As gravity takes its toll, the beams strain under the pressure and finally give way. It is now clear to all, without a single casualty, the ship is going down. Now the panic truly sets in. Those below deck swarm like rats onto the top deck, further throwing off the balance of the ship. As the ship sinks, it now begins to roll, tossing dozens of men into the water. The desperate survivors attempt to cling to anything that floats, be it a piece of hull, a barrel, or their fellow comrades. They are now officially out of combat, but remain trapped on the battlefield itself. Nothing more than pieces of floating debris. Around them, warships continue to swirl as the action rages on. With this scenario, I hope we have made it clear how messy of an affair naval battles must have been. Defeats happened piecemeal across the entire front as the tides of combat slowly shifted. Thus, the entire process for a battle such as Salamis must have taken hours, with many phases of combat, which gradually built up to what might be recognized as the defeat of the entire fleet. Along the way, we have already described how defeated crews might sit idly aboard neutralized ships or cling to debris in the waters below. From here, they might ride out the battle and hope to be picked up by allies. However, Herodotus mentions that many survivors attempted to swim or float back to land. It was apparently for this reason that the Persians had deployed forces on the island of Psytalia to rescue their own men and capture those of the enemy. Thus, it might be the case that observers along the shores could get a sense of how the battle was faring based on who washed up on the beaches. Given the eventual outcome of Salamis, perhaps we might imagine this to entail a greater proportion of Persians. And yet, Herodotus also mentions that, quote, many of the barbarians drowned in the sea since they did not know how to swim. We might also imagine that their numbers were further thinned as they were run over by maneuvering warships or shot down by passing deck crews. And though this goes unreported, the carnage must have also drawn the attention of creatures from the deep who might have begun to snatch men from the waves. Whatever the case, it was surely a hellish experience. The bloody aftermath of the event would be remembered by the survivors of both sides, and is actually captured by one of these men, the Greek tragedian Aeschylus, in the following poem. Quote, the Graecian vessels, not unskilled, were smiting round about. The hulls of ships were overset, The sea was hid from sight, covered with wreckage and the death of men. The reefs and headlands were with corpses filled, and in disordered flight each ship was rowed, as many as were of the Persian host. But they, like tunnies or some shoal of fish, with broken oars and fragments of the wrecks, struck us and clove us, and at once a cry of lamentation filled the briny sea, till the black darkness's eye did rescue us. The number of our griefs, not though 10 days I talked together, could I fully tell, but this know well, that never in one day perished so great a multitude of men. In these closing stages of the battle, Herodotus provides some additional narrative clues about what took place. For instance, he mentions that as the Persian ships began to withdraw, they were chased down by Greek crews. Apparently, there were even some bounties placed on the capture of specific targets. For instance, Herodotus claims that the Athenian captains could claim a prize of 10,000 drachmas for whoever captured Artemisia alive. While she is reported to have escaped, many others were not so lucky. Here is a passage from another ancient naval battle which gives you a sense of how brutal these sorts of pursuits could be. Quote, "After the battle had ended, the victors pursued with even greater ardor the enemy who were fleeing in disorder, and destroyed more than 100 of their ships, and stationing their lighter crews along the shore, they slew any of the sailors who were swimming towards the land army. And as they perished in great numbers, not far from the land, while the troops of Dionysius were unable to help them in any way, the whole region was full of corpses and wreckage." But the Greeks at Salamis did not stop there. Apparently, their pursuit of the enemy extended onto land as well. Herodotus states, quote, "Aristides, son of Lysimachus, the Athenian whom I mentioned a little before this as a valiant man, did this in the commotion that arose at Salamis. Taking many of the armed men who were arrayed along the shore of Salamis, he brought them across and landed them on the island of Psytalia, and they slaughtered all the Persians who were on that island." In this way did the immediate, bloody aftermath of Salamis unfold until night drew these activities to a close. In these final moments, Herodotus mentions that the Greeks towed as many of the wrecks back to their side of the bay as possible so as to deny the enemy a chance to reman them. Thus did they maximize the damage of their victory. And yet while night may have brought a temporary reprieve and a chance to celebrate, the Greeks knew that the danger had not yet fully passed. Indeed, Herodotus notes that Xerxes made a show of attempting to build a dike of earth and ships over to Salamis while preparing his remaining fleet for combat. However, this was apparently just a front to keep the Greeks on the defensive and his own army in line while he prepared a withdrawal. In the Persian camp, Xerxes dispatched news of events back to the capital and called upon his generals for counsel. Mardonius was said to have stated the following, quote, "Sire, be not grieved nor greatly distressed because of what has befallen us. It is not on things of wood that the issue hangs for us, but on men and horses. Nor can you say that we have done less than brave men should. And if Phoenicians and Egyptians and Cyprians and Cilicians have so done, it is not the Persians who have had any part in this disaster. Therefore, since the Persians are in no way to blame, be guided by me. If you are resolved not to remain, march homewards then with the greater part of your army. It is for me, however, to enslave and deliver Hellas to you with 300,000 of your host whom I will choose." Artemisia was then asked for her advice. She apparently backed the proposal, stating that all outcomes were to his favor. If Mardonius was victorious, the praises would go to his master, and that if Mardonius failed, the blame would go to the king's servant. Xerxes was pleased by this and decided to proceed. Next, Herodotus states, quote, "Having given his sons to Artemisia's charge to be carried to Ephesus, Xerxes called Mardonius to him and bade him choose whom he would from the army and make his words good so far as endeavor availed." That is as far as matters went on that day. In the night, however, the admirals by the king's command put out to sea at Phalerum and made for the Hellespont again with all speed to guard the bridges for the king's passage. When it was day, the Greeks saw the land army abiding where it had been and supposed the ships also to be at Phalerum. Thinking also that there would be a sea fight, they prepared to defend themselves. When however they learned that the ships were gone, they straightway resolved on pursuit. So they pursued Xerxes' fleet as far as Andros, but failed to catch sight of it. And when they came to Andros, they held a council. It is here that Themistocles and the Athenians argued on continued pursuit. However, Eurybiades argued that it was foolish to trap the enemy in Greece when they had already chosen flight. Doing so would only ensure that the Persians either feed their vast army by scouring the lands like locusts or by renewing their offensive against the allies. He finished his argument by saying that if the war should be continued, then, quote, let it be that country and not ours which is at stake. This swayed the war council. The fleet would advance no further in pursuit. Meanwhile, back in Attica, the Persian host marched north along the road to Thessaly. It would be here that Mardonius would select the forces with which he was to wage the remainder of the campaign, while Xerxes was to return home with the rest of the army. Herodotus recounts their journey back to Asia as being ravaged by the misfortunes of storms, plagues, and revolts. With the enemy thus at a safe distance, the Greeks now returned to the battlefield of Salamis to truly celebrate their victory. We can only imagine in what state it must have been in. Along the shores and shallows, there would have been a graveyard of ship parts and bodies strewn about. Indeed, Herodotus even mentions that a western wind carried many of the wrecks to a region called Colius, where prophecy had foretold its people would drink soup with oars. But unseen beneath the waves must have been an even greater spectacle of destruction. The bones of sunken ships and the armaments of war now littered the seafloor in a dazzling new man-made reef. Soon, Poseidon would come to greet the souls of those who lay here, while the creatures of his realm laid claim to their final resting place. Above the seas, the Greeks did their best to salvage what they could from the aftermath of Salamis. Herodotus states, quote, first of all they set apart for the gods, among other first fruits, 3 Phoenician triremes, one to be dedicated at the Isthmus, where it was till my lifetime, the second at Sunium, and the third for Ajax at Salamis, where they were. After that, they divided the spoils, and sent the first fruits of it to Delphi. Of this was made a man's image, 12 cubits high, holding in his hand the figurehead of a ship. This stood in the same place as the golden statue of Alexander the Macedonian. After the division of the spoils, the Greeks sailed to the Isthmus, there to award the prize of excellence to him who had shown himself most worthy of it in that war. But when the admirals came, and at the altar of Poseidon gave their votes to judge who was first and who second among them, each of them voted for himself first, supposing himself to have done the best service. The greater part of them, however, united in giving the second place to Themistocles. So they each gained but 1 vote for first, while Themistocles far outstripped them in votes for the second place. The Greeks were too jealous to assign the prize, and sailed away, each to his own place, leaving the matter undecided. Nevertheless, Themistocles was lauded, and throughout all of Hellas was deemed the wisest man by far of the Greeks. But as a man worthy of this title, he knew that while they may have won the battle, the war was far from over. In our next episode, we shall continue the saga of the Greco-Persian Wars with the campaign of Mardonius. For now, I hope you've appreciated this moment of pause to consider the often overlooked aftermath of the Battle of Salamis. If you enjoy this sort of coverage, we have many more episodes in our Aftermath series. For now, I wanted to thank the patrons for funding the channel. Join them to get HD downloads of all our art, to catch script previews, and to vote on upcoming content. I also wanted to thank the researchers, writers, and artists who made this episode possible. We couldn't have done it without this team or this community. If you like this episode, be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and check out these other related videos. See you in the next one.